Hey everybody, this is Matt with mathsmath.com. Thanks for joining us here today as we talk about integers and absolute value. We're in the Common Core Math standard of the number system, and we're going to use our previous knowledge of understanding to deal with fractions and adding and subtracting and integers and dealing with rational numbers. Today, especially with integers and learning what those are. Well, our guiding question is what kinds of numbers are there and how do they fit on a number line? All right, that's what you're going to be able to answer by the end of this lesson today. All right, so let's jump into it. Now, football. How on earth does football relate to math? Well, if you think about it, when you take a football, you look on the field, there is really positive and negative numbers on the field. That's what an integer is, positive and negative whole numbers. So when you put it on the field, if that quarterback takes the ball forward, that's a positive gain. Whereas if that quarterback gets sacked and the ball goes backward, that's a loss. It's a negative amount of yards. So it goes backwards. That is a negative number. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, all right? All right, so I first want to talk about speed and velocity. This is going to come up throughout the lesson today, just dealing with the different terms here. Speed tells how fast an object is moving, but doesn't tell direction. Whereas velocity does. It tells you how fast it's moving, and it tells you whether it's going forward or backward, up or down. Okay, depending on whether it's positive or negative. You can imagine positive speed is going forward and negative speed is going backwards. That's the idea. All right, so if it's positive, it's moving up and down. If it's negative, it's moving down or left. Positive up or right, negative down or left. Speed will never be negative. It's always going to be positive. So let's talk about what integers are. You're going to need to know this definition, so definitely write this one down. Integers they're counting numbers, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're opposites. Example, -1, -2, -3. They're not fractions, they're not decimals, they're not square roots of numbers, that kind of thing, okay? Here's some examples. -1, -3, 0, 1, 4, and some non-examples, 1/2, 0.33. That's the idea, okay? Make sense? All right, so let's look at it. Let's see how it relates to real life, especially with velocity. We need to know absolute value if we're going to talk about speed, because what happens if you take the absolute value of your velocity, it will give you speed. Well, what is absolute value? Absolute value is the distance from that number you choose to 0. Remember, it's not the opposite of a number. So, for example, how do you go from the absolute value of -12? How many units is it to 0? Well, it's 12. Okay? Yes, -12 is the opposite of, or the absolute value of 12 is the opposite there, but the absolute value of 12 is also 12. It's not the opposite, okay? So don't get that in your head that you're thinking, oh, it's just the opposite of the number. It doesn't work. Think about it this way. It's always, always, always positive. Absolute value is always positive, right? Just remember that. Don't think about it being the opposite of a number. All right, so let's go back to football. Quarterback throws a football from the 50-yard line to the wide receiver, and you can see where the ball was at each of the second horizontally in this chart, okay? So at 0 seconds, the ball was at the 50-yard line. 1 second, it was at the 47. 2 was at the 44. 3, 41, and so forth, okay? How many yards did the ball move each second? All right, so here it goes from 50 to 47. That's 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards. So each second, that ball moved 3 yards. Now, what's the ball's speed? If it's moving 3 yards, how many seconds does it go every 3 yards? 1 second. So every second, 3 yards. Every second, 3 yards. So therefore, the ball's speed is 3 feet per second. Or 3 yards per second, rather. 3 yards per second. Well, if the ball goes up until 2 seconds, so imagine this, you're throwing the ball up, bam, the pass goes up till 2 seconds, and then afterwards the ball falls down to the 35-yard line, or it's caught. When is the ball's velocity positive and when is the ball's velocity negative, dealing with up and down? If you think about it, from 0 to 2, that ball is going up, so it's got a positive velocity. Whereas here, it's going down after 2 seconds, it's got a negative velocity. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's go to this example. You and your friend are standing on a bridge and you throw a ball up at 10 feet per second and your friend throws it down under the bridge at 12 feet per second. What was the velocity of your ball? Was it positive or negative dealing with up or down? What about your friends? They threw it down, so is it positive or negative? Well, if you think about it, mine is 10 feet, and it's positive, whereas my friend's is down, so it's negative. But if we're comparing the speeds, we take the absolute value. All right, so we take the absolute value of 10. What's the distance from 10 to 0? Well, that's 10. What's the distance of negative 12 to 0? Well, that's 12. So which ball had the greater speed? Well, remember, speed does not matter positive or negative wise. Okay, so my friend's ball would be faster because he threw it at a negative 12. Okay. All right, think of the path again of the football vertically. If the ball travels 15 yards up in the air, about how much will it travel down? If it travels 15 yards up, how many yards is it going to travel down? Well, it would travel 15 back, wouldn't it? Be minus 15 or negative 15. So the equation would be something like 15 up minus 15 gets back to the same position vertically, right? It starts at 0, goes up 15, goes down 15, ends at 0 as well. Does that make sense? All right, well, let's talk about what absolute value is and just kind of go more mathematically here. When we say it, it looks like this, first of all, but we say the absolute value of negative 3. Okay, and the answer to that is positive 3. Remember, absolute value is always positive. On a number line, it looks something like this. Start off with negative 3. How many units is it to 0? That's the idea. 1, 2, 3. So the answer is 3, okay? So this is what we're talking about with speed and velocity. If we think about it, our velocity is positive 45, so what's our speed going to be? Remember, you're taking the absolute value of it, and that will give you speed. So simply put, that's still 45 miles an hour. No big deal, right? Whereas if it's negative 105 miles per hour, that means you're going backwards or down. Speed is the absolute value of that, so you have to get rid of the negative. Remember, it's always positive. So what is it? Yeah, it's 105 miles per hour. That's your speed. Whereas your velocity, negative 105. I mean, think about it. On your speedometer in your car, does it have a negative direction? I mean, think about when you're going in reverse. Does it go backwards? Well, the car does, but does the speedometer little ticky thing? No, it doesn't. All right, I want you to work through these problems. Find the absolute value of these integers, and I want you to complete these statements down here using greater than or less than, and then order these to least to greatest, and then tell me find the missing value here. Having trouble? Well, definitely remember, use the positives for the absolute value, and then take the positives here. Remember something like this. Yeah, negative 5, the absolute value of it is 5, so it's greater than negative 2. Absolute value of negative 6 would be 6. Absolute value of negative 2 would be 2, so 6 is greater than 2. Least to greatest, definitely want to find the absolute value of these first. So make this 8, make that 3, and then put them in least to greatest. Whereas the velocity here, remember, speed never has a negative in front of it. So all you got to do is drop the negative. All right, well, here are your hints for your answers. Okay, well, are you able to answer this question of what kinds of numbers there are? And how do you fit them on a number line? And what is absolute value? I bet you are. Well, that was it as we talked about football and integers and absolute value. Got a better picture of that now? Well, I bet you do. This is Matt with mathsmath.com. Thanks for joining us. Check us out on Facebook at Solving Maths Problems or on Twitter with Maths Math, and enjoy math.